So it's my honor to be speaking to you on this topic. And I was a charter member of this academy, thanks to Paul Armstrong, I think, back in the old days. And so the first time I've spoken to you, and it's a particular honor that it's on this topic. And so thanks to Carol Herbert also. So Starry, Starry Night. So this is either Vincent van Gogh, or this actually happens to be a DNA microarray. So my area is human genetics and trying to apply the whole tools of the Human Genome Project to understand issues of health and disease. And so I'm a physician, and so I look at it from the point of view of a doctor. And of course, I'm driven by the Hippocratic Oath. So first, do no harm. Everything that I have tried to do in my research career, even before there was sort of systematized ethics, which there was not actually in the 1990s for a lot of genome research. So I had to draw on Hippocrates and to do no harm, try to do no harm, and then hopefully do some good. So the slides that I'll be showing you today, some of them were borrowed from a friend and collaborator, Laura Arbour from UBC. And the first thing I wanted to say in terms of genetics research with indigenous communities is the concept of DNA on loan. The DNA is on loan. The DNA is the property of the research subjects, our partners actually in the community. They can have it back at any time for any reason. It is merely on loan to the researchers for the project. And the second thing is that the research has to respect the needs of the community. In fact, it is initiated by so the projects that I've been involved with began and were initiated from the community, and the invitation came from the community. I was not seeking to go out and and for all of the projects that I'm going to describe. So here, there are methods, and we're looking at knowledge and assessing outcomes, and there's this linkage, and hopefully I'll show you then some examples where we take the DNA back from the community, we take it down to the university, we run it through the next generation sequencer, we come up with some data, and then maybe bring it back, share the knowledge, and then learn, find out what is our next step. There are CIHR guidelines for health research involving Aboriginal people. This concept of the biological sample should be considered to be on loan to the researcher, unless otherwise specified in the research agreement. As part of in the Tri-Council statement, also as part of the community engagement, researchers shall address and specify in the research agreement, the rights and the proprietary interests of individuals and communities to the extent that these exist in human biological materials, including DNA and associated data to be collected, stored, and used in the course of research. So there are policies. But Indigenous peoples historically have had concerns with research using DNA. And so why? So these are, some of them are here. We're just briefly displaced research monies that in fact, either miscommunication, misrepresentation, that the priorities of the community were not addressed. That there was some other issue that then became the focus of research. Issues of trust, this whole issue of helicopter research where the researcher just drops in, collects the samples, goes back, and the community never hears from them again. Genetic study might violate a particular group's cultural beliefs, secondary use of DNA or cell lines for research for which the consent was not given, and then general concerns of the vulnerability to exploitation. And I think you've heard the history of this, and I think there is really, a good reason to be concerned about this last issue, that the benefit that the research is happening to the benefit of mainstream society, mainstream science and society and economics, and not looking at the interest of the community. This is a quote actually from the US, but I think the impact of genetics to us, any part of ourselves, is sacred. Scientists say it's just DNA. For an Indian, it's not just DNA, it's a part of a person. It's sacred. It has deep religious significance. It is part of the essence of a person. And I must say that the longer that I've been doing genetic research now for 30 years, and in fact, this is really reflecting my own view of DNA and how it, fits into the broader things, not just a chemical. It's not the Dawkins view. I mean, the Dawkins view it's one view. It's kind of a simplistic view. I think it's much broader. It's part of a whole. Why would a community be in favor of? So why would even communities initiate research? Because there has to be some sort of perceived value to the community. There's some priority. The genetic research has got to have a significant impact, and there's possibly even prevention. I'm going to show you a couple of examples. Arrhythmias, perhaps diabetes. The genetic component of the disease may be important to the final understanding, both for the community and for the world at large. And then to study the genetic component of a certain disease may actually be destigmatizing in some cases. So if there's a named congenital abnormality or autoimmune liver disease are examples. So this was the project that I was invited to participate at first. This was Stuart and Bernie Zinman actually invited me, and this was in Sandy Lake in northern Ontario, and Stuart had worked with these people for years and had developed a trusting relationship. And it's really that last line there, 40% have diabetes, and so why was that? And so I was a geneticist working at the U of T at the time with my little lab at St. Mike's Hospital, and then the issue, well, you're a geneticist, you're an endocrinologist, so could this be genetic, So we actually went up there. So this is the first thing. It's like one thing then to send your postdoc or your student up there, and I agree, and that's important. It's critical. But then the actual CIHR grant holding person, takes time out of their schedule and goes up and meets, and if necessarily meets repeatedly with the band council and the health authorities and establishes trust. And so here we are 20 years later. Stuart hasn't changed very much, but and the bear, the motto of that airline is, I think it was the bear will get you there, right, Stuart? So the bear did get us there. Anyway, we did find a variant that contributed to diabetes, a transcription factor, HNF1 alpha. You would maybe recognize this as the MODY3 gene. We've had many publications about this. So those graphs show the trajectory based on the genotype. So if you have one dose of the allele, it accelerates the onset of diabetes by about 7 years. And so this has now been reduced to practice. So Elizabeth Sellers uses this genotype now whenever somebody comes in at the University of Manitoba, so to the pediatric diabetes clinic, or any First Nations with diabetes coming in for assessment to their diabetes program gets this genotype measured. And it tells them something. If you have this genotype, you're less insulin resistant, younger onset, and more likely to require medications, more likely to need earlier intervention to prevent the complications. The other thing is the rightmost line there, the negative genotype. So there's still a lot of diabetes that is happening in the absence of this genotype. So this is just one part of the picture of diabetes. Second example, this is Laura Arbour from UBC. I mentioned her before. It seems all my collaborators, I take pictures of them in the airport. So here we are traveling up to Nunavut for a meeting, and she's discovered the gene in the Gitkasan people in northern BC for a long QT syndrome, the mutation in the KCNQ1 gene, and there was sudden death happening in that community due to long QT syndrome, cardiac arrest. So and it's been shown now so it's lots interesting. I'm trying to keep to the time limit here, trying to contain all of the sort of science that I want to talk to you about. But basically, now genotyping for this variant has become part of predictive testing for sudden death in that community, and putting in implantable devices, for instance, if asymptomatic people are identified as carriers. A third collaborator, Dr. Q Young, he and I are going up on this trip to Inuvialuit. So here, this was a multi-nation study of Inuit people that involved Inuit from Greenland, and then Keewatin, Inuvialuit, Nunavik, Alaska, so in fact everything except Siberia, basically the circumpolar population. So there's a variant of the LDL receptor up there that's carried by about 15% of people, and it raises the cholesterol above a level of 5. So our latest lipid guidelines say that an LDL above 5, even if you don't have any risk factors, should be consideration for intervention for prevention of cardiovascular disease. So carriers of this variant up there in the far north are 3 times as likely to have this extreme LDL issue. Traditionally, they have been protected from heart disease, possibly because of their lifestyle, but we think this represents possible susceptibility up there. In fact, this whole issue of genetics of cardiovascular disease in indigenous populations was reviewed recently by Laura and myself. So what is finally to sum up, the role of the community? So the community has to initiate the research. They're involved in the development of the protocol, ongoing advisory role. They can actually play a role locally as research assistants. We present the results to them before we write the paper, before they review the manuscripts. Many of them are actually co-authors on the manuscripts. We then look at new hypotheses, new applications. There's a continuous conversation, updates, results, research challenges. Now, to sum up, so again, this is from 20 years ago. This was the meeting in 1998, I think. So you can see myself there, Stuart. Third from the right is Harry Meekus, the deputy chief. He was the one that initiated the project. His mother-in-law had died of diabetes, and it was very personally affecting to him, and he wanted to get to the bottom of it. And second from the left is Tony Hanley, who was a master's student who actually lived up there, and he's now a professor in the Department of Nutrition at U of T, continuing this type of research. This was the meeting where they approved the DNA work. And then a little bit later, this is about 4 or 5 years ago, the hypercholesterolemia study in Inuvik. So this is the Inuvialuit Settlement Region Health Authority. You can see Q Young there, just to the left. And this is again where they approved the DNA studies to look at heart disease risk. So these are my acknowledgments. I think anything else that comes up in questions, I'd be very happy. But the point is, the few things then: DNA on loan, community initiation, community engagement, constant contact. It's just basically being a human being. So thanks very much.